Start your day with It's the Business. Here's Phil Dobbie.
Yes, good morning. Today, what's next for the travel industry?
We know from the roadmap that we won't be able to unlock international travel at all at the earliest on the 17th of May, and it depends what happens with the virus between now and then.
And how different will the travel industry be when we come out the other side? We'll talk to destination marketing expert Tom Buncle about the sorts of travellers you should be targeting if you want to get your slice of the market later this year.
And the pandemic has made people realise what matters, and that is more about relationships and getting something out of going somewhere rather than just, as I say, Instagram snacking.
Also today, the government is pushing ahead with freeports, even though they have no idea what benefits it's going to provide to the economy.
It's very hard to do that modelling, but we do intend to do so once we've had the successful bids agreed.
And we'll hear from the Bank of England governor on his concerns about Europe's attempts to grab hold of the city's dominance in euro clearing operations. We'll look at what all that's about today.
I have to say to you quite bluntly that would be highly controversial, and I have to say that would be something that we would, I think, have to and want to resist very firmly.
It is Thursday morning. It's the 25th of February, 2021. Good morning.
And now, it's the business, making sense of it all with Phil Dobbie.
So a £2 billion loss for Heathrow Airport. That's what they announced yesterday for last year. They say it's because passenger numbers haven't been this low since the 1970s. They had 22.1 million passengers last year, but more than half of those were in January and February before the lockdown. The year before, they had 81 million passengers. Last year, their revenue fell by 62% to £1.2 billion. This year, in January, passenger numbers are down 89%. They also say that cargo traffic is down 21% because there's fewer planes using the airport. And you'd have to assume that February, March and April are going to be the same because May the 17th has been given as the earliest date for international travel to resume. But beyond that, people have been booking like crazy. EasyJet said their booking surged by 600% overnight after Boris Johnson gave his roadmap out of the lockdown earlier this week. I wouldn't be booking anything just yet, would you? I mean, we've got a place in Cornwall sorted out for August. That's about it. And there's a hammock at the end of the garden should the sun come out soon. But Grant Shapps basically put it in place. He's the Transport Secretary, saying on Peston last night on ITV that there are lots of variables that are going to determine how quickly we can travel overseas.
We're going to have a report out on the 12th of April. That's going to be a global travel task force report where we'll look at what will it take? What's required? And we know for sure that there won't be international travel at scale before the May 17th date. One of the things we need to do is look at what happens if other places aren't as vaccinated. And also lots of people who won't be able to get vaccinations. And for example, children that make up 21% of our population. We can't have a situation where it's okay if you've been vaccinated, you can travel, but you can't elsewhere if you haven't been. So, what do you do about that? And things like, of course, testing could form a part of that. These are all the things that we're going to look into in this Global Travel Task Force report on the 12th of April. We know from the roadmap that we won't be able to unlock international travel at all at the earliest on the 17th of May. And, it depends what happens with the virus between now and then.
And it's going to be late June, of course, before all restrictions are lifted. Even then, it's going to depend on other countries and where vaccinations obviously are running slower. Most places are running slower than we are here. Australia, for example, they have only just started, and it's not going to happen very quickly there, given the way that it has started, because basically they're given the contract to roll out the vaccine to a recruitment firm. Yeah, Healthcare Australia, who are now advertising for lots of people to do the vaccine. So that's how well prepared they are. And their CEO of Healthcare Australia has had to resign because they gave an overdose to a few old age pensioners because the people giving the vaccines hadn't been trained. So bad start there. But here, well, we are well ahead. So is there any chance that actually things could happen sooner? Could we holiday sooner? Could the lockdown measures actually end before late June? Well, Gavin Williamson at the government press conference yesterday was fairly certain on this.
Well, as the Prime Minister said, that there are no plans whatsoever to be moving ahead of the dates that have already been given. We want to give public as well as business the confidence and the assurance as to when these next steps are going to be happening, but there are certainly no plans to be moving ahead of that.
Well, we all have confidence when we hear Gavin Williamson talk, don't we? maybe not. Testing, obviously, is going to be crucial behind all of this. It's been revealed that maybe COVID passports could be something that's used, and it might be managed via an app on your phone. Have I got news for you? Tweeted Dido Harding has secured the $8 billion contract to develop it for the Nokia 3310. That'd be about right. Or maybe they'll just give us all access to a spreadsheet. We'll just enter our own details. We might have to download Office 97 so it's compatible with the government systems, but maybe that's the way forward. But look, meanwhile, because it's going to take a while, Heathrow Airport, in fact all airports and the airlines, are going to continue to struggle. In their announcement yesterday, Heathrow Airport were very clear what they wanted from Rishi Sunak when he does his budget next week. They want 100% business rates relief. They want to extend the furlough scheme, and they want to reverse the tourist tax. All seems very doable, doesn't it? On the good news front, Heathrow Airport has actually become carbon neutral in 2020. That is a lot easier to do, isn't it, when you don't have any customers, or many of them anyway, and they are still pushing for an expansion of Heathrow Airport, which surely makes very little sense right now until we're absolutely certain what the pattern of travel is going to be in the long term. Most of the revenue, I was having a look because I was researching for this show. Can you imagine researching for this podcast? So I was having a look at actually how Heathrow Airport makes its money. Most of it obviously comes from aircraft landing charges and parking charges for the aircraft. Incidentally, though, they make £125 million a year out of car parking charges. There must be other ways that, in the short term, they can make money while people aren't travelling. If you can't go to Spain, the runways aren't being used very much. If we get a hot summer, maybe the airfield could be used for sunbathing. Imagine socially distanced how many people you could get to lie out on Heathrow Airport on the apron, as they call it. Or we encourage people to go to the airport without actually going anywhere. So you get that nearly getting away experience. You can go in, you can walk around the shops, you can feel as though you're about to go on an international holiday, and then just at the point where you'd normally get on the plane, you get in a cab and go home again. The good news is, hopefully, it will all be over by the middle of the year, and maybe we won't have to wear masks. Can you imagine if you are lying out in the sun and you have to wear a mask? Just imagine the strange suntans we're going to get. But the only hope is that we don't get new strains that are resistant to the vaccine. If they break out, then we've got problems. And in fact, just yesterday, people living in Lambeth's SW8 and SW9 postcodes, or in Buckinghamshire, HP10. You've got access to surge testing there because there's been cases of the South African variant. A few days ago, there were 235 confirmed cases of this variant from South Africa in the UK, and it is rising, and there are concerns that vaccines aren't particularly efficient against it. Plus, with this South African variant, not only do you get sick and lose taste, but you also talk noticeably louder than anyone else. Because that's what South Africans do. There's also a Californian variant now as well, which is emerging. They're coming out all over the place, aren't they? The Californian variant, you only get it if you're wearing Lycra, and it is passed through the polystyrene on takeaway coffee cups. So if you don't do either of those things, you're all right. We were supposed to be stopping these strains getting in, of course, by hotel quarantining. If you came from those red zone countries, then you should be staying in a hotel. But we found out at the Commons Home Affairs Committee yesterday just how few of the 15,000 people still arriving in the UK each day, just how few of them are going into hotel quarantines.
Yeah, so it's so the number of people who have gone in are relatively small. It's only sort of 100 or so per day of people who are going into hotels at the moment.
That's 100 out of 15,000 a day. That's less than 1%. That's reassuring, isn't it? By the way, those people who are not willing to have the vaccine, apart from ethnic minorities, research out of Oxford shows the very opposite of ethnic minorities are also resistant. Brexit voters are 7% more likely to resist having a vaccine. Maybe if we told them if they have the vaccine, they can have a vaccine passport, and that's going to be blue and printed in the UK. Maybe that would change their minds. Now, we're going to talk more about tourism later on in the programme. First of all, though, I want to talk about freeports, because the government is still keen to push on with this idea of freeports. The International Trade Committee got together to discuss it yesterday, but they clearly have no idea of whether it's going to work or whether it's going to improve GDP. Stephen Barclay, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, was there answering questions. He basically said, well, it's too early to get bogged down in detail like that.
Until we know where the locations are and what the focus of the businesses on those sites are, it's very hard to do that modelling. But we do intend to do so once we've had the successful bids agreed.
So at the moment, it'd be fair to say that we've really no idea what the GDP gain will be from freeports.
Well, it's a regeneration intervention, and I think as the Scottish Government would say, as the Welsh Government and others would say, with regional interventions, it's not a whole of economy intervention around GDP as a whole. It is a targeted intervention.
Well, not that targeted. I mean, we're going to have 10 of them apparently dotted around the country. They've taken bids. They've had 40 bids for them so far. The bids closed on the 5th of February. You would have thought they'd have an idea in the budget figures that Rishi Sunak is going to present next week. Surely they'd have some idea about the contribution to GDP. For example, we know that if we get a trade deal with the US, top line figures tell us we'd have a 0.2% improvement in GDP. If we had a trade deal with Australia, ooh, that would be good, wouldn't it? That would help. 0.02%. Most of that Tim Tams, the sale of those here. But from freeports, we haven't got any idea what that's going to do. Back in November last year, Rishi Sunak said our new freeports will create national hubs for trade, innovation and commerce, levelling up communities across the UK, creating new jobs and turbocharging our economic recovery. Although how much of that turbocharging of the economy is anybody's guess, because we don't have those numbers. The freeports apparently are going to include favourable customs duties like a suspension of VAT, business rates relief, enhanced capital allowances, and employees might not have to pay their national insurance contributions. So I'm not quite sure how when they get old, they just get hungry, I guess, is the idea behind that. But I really don't get how this is going to work. Because if we import stuff from overseas and then add some value to it and then ship it over to Europe, then being Europe being obviously our closest trading partner, then the Europeans are going to look at that and go, well, how much value has been added and does it fall into our rules of origin legislation? If not, we could end up having to pay tariffs on it. So, you don't pay VAT here, but you're going to pay tariffs on exporting the stuff to Europe. How's that going to work? Well, we don't know because they haven't done the modelling yet because they want to see what they're going to do before they do the modelling on what it is they want to do. All seems a bit arse about, doesn't it? Now, talking about Europe quickly before we return to tourism, there is a push by Europe by the EU to grab an ever-increasing share of the market for clearing of the euro. So the way it works, if you buy or sell the euro or you buy bonds in euros or European shares, if you're in the finance industry doing that, that transaction is managed through a clearinghouse that makes sure that the amount of money is moved around and each side of the deal gets what's owed to them. And the risk if one side of the transaction isn't completed or is delayed is held by that clearinghouse. So it becomes a question of scale. The bigger the clearinghouse, the lower the risk proportionally. Also, if you're balancing out transactions, then less settlement has to occur because if you're paying someone what they owe, the difference is between what they buy and what they sell. So obviously, the bigger the clearinghouse, and the ultimately that means that less money actually physically needs to change. So there are economies of scale, and the London Clearinghouse is responsible for most euro clearing, almost 950 billion euros worth each day. Now, it doesn't matter the fact that, the euro isn't in the UK. There's this thing called equivalence, which means in the EU and the UK, our trade agreement means that, we need to operate on the basis of equivalence. But here we are. This is worth quite a bit for the City of London as well. So this is a big issue. The EU wants to get their mitts on it, even though under the issue of equivalence, there's no reason why they should. And Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England, wants to stop them. Here he is at the Treasury Committee yesterday. He went out of his way to make the point that Europe has got to be stopped from doing this.
And so, of course, the question then becomes not a question about equivalence, but a question about how can it get the other 75%, bearing in mind, as I said earlier, that equivalence doesn't get the other 75%. To get the other 75% would require, by fiat, if you like, would require something very controversial, such as an attempt at extraterritorial legislation, or an attempt to, if you like, force or cajole banks and dealers to say, there will be some other penalty for you unless you move this clearing activity into the euro area. And that is, to my mind, what we're seeing, particularly this week, and there's some papers circulating around, I know, that have been reported on, coming out of, I think, the European banks. That seems to be where the debate's heading. Now, I'm not surprised by this, because in many ways this debate is not about equivalence. It's about something which for quite a long time now has been called location policy. And I have to say to you quite bluntly that would be highly controversial. And I mean, I have to say that would be something that we would, I think, have to and want to resist very firmly.
So watch that story develop. The city could be one industry impacted further by Brexit. Well, indirectly by Brexit, because the EU is adamant it wants more and more of the euro clearing operations to happen inside the Eurozone. In fact, I'm sure they want it all to happen. So watch that story develop over the next days and weeks. Looking at the numbers involved, it makes the fate of the fishing industry seem a little trivial. Although I have to say, I'd rather look after the welfare of a fisherman and his family in a coastal village in Scotland, for example, than a city worker earning squillions moving money around. It's also going to be good to see people in the tourism sector get their jobs back. As I said, we learned yesterday that Heathrow Airport had lost £2 billion in 2020. It was its toughest year ever as traffic levels fell to record lows. But tourism will bounce back quickly, we keep on getting told. Certainly there are, as we've also learned today, lots of Brits rushing to book their summer holidays after Boris Johnson said, provisionally at least, all restrictions would be off, at least as far as this country is concerned, from mid-July. That doesn't mean, of course, COVID-19 has been eradicated and practically every country is behind us when it comes out to rolling vaccines. So whether you'll actually be allowed in at the other end is a big question mark. But as people do venture back onto planes, how should destinations promote themselves to get their share of the cake? Will, for example, we be looking for different holiday experiences? Well, let's talk to Tom Buncle, who runs Yellow Railroad, which is a travel consultancy firm. He's also worked for many years at the British Tourist Authority, or Visit Britain as it became known, and he was also head of the Scottish Tourist Board. In fact, we were colleagues many years ago, both working for the British Tourist Authority, living in different parts of the world. You remember, Tom, I got the plum job, actually. I was living in Australia promoting holidays in the UK. That's not a bad gig if you can get it, really.
Well, it's a pretty good one, Phil. I was always envious of you, but I was in Singapore for 6 years, so I think mine was the plum job, really.
Yeah, pretty good. But, of course, we all swore allegiance to the UK as the premier holiday destination, but there are many other parts of the world, and you are advising countries and destinations now. So, I mean, we've not been able to travel overseas, so we've all taken to domestic holidays. Do you think that, and that will, of course, will be the same around the world, people are discovering their own backyard. Do you think that's going to have a lasting impact? Might we do a bit more of the domestic holiday thing, or do you think we can't wait to get back on those planes and get back in the sunshine?
Okay, well, I think it's yes to both questions. I mean, certainly as far as domestic tourism goes, I hope so. And there are two things, reasons I hope so. One is I think people might have learnt a lot more about their own country during in between lockdowns when they've been able to go away within the UK. And I hope will be inspired by what they've seen and commit to travelling more within their own country. And that might take the form of a few more domestic short breaks instead of the third or fourth short break to European cities. So there's that. But the other part of your question, to be honest, we live in the Northern Hemisphere. We're addicted to vitamin D, so we're going to want to rush off to the sunshine at some stage in the year.
So a bit of both, yeah. And but we've also got that element of risk. I'm sure that's going to be in the back of our minds. I wonder how long that's going to last for, but maybe for a couple of years, where we do think, well, okay, it's worth the risk to get overseas and get some of that vitamin D, but maybe not do it repeatedly, so hence the shorter breaks at home. But also, I mean, our choice of destination as well, because as I was saying, the vaccination rollouts are different for each country. So the UAE, for example, is doing well. So if I wanted sunshine right now, I might be going to Dubai rather than Greece or Spain or Germany. In fact, most of Europe, because they're well behind the eight ball. I might feel safer going to Dubai to get some sun.
Yeah, but I think safety is a factor, not just of the place you're going to, but how you get there. So the longer you're on a plane, I think for the foreseeable future, by which I mean the next maybe 6 months to a year, will be a factor. People may want to travel shorter distance, spend less time on a plane, less time getting to and from their destination when they actually reach the other end. And therefore, I think short haul is going to be the boom. And safety is an issue that for the first time, we're really seeing it as in all the research is showing that people are extremely concerned and they want to be reassured. And I've done a lot of work in crisis recovery in different countries, and particularly post-conflict countries affected by terrorism and natural disasters. And the one thing we always say to people is don't mention the war. Don't mention the problem. Talk about the positives. This is the first time I have seen really the need to mention the issue, to mention the safety. How safe will you be? Are there enough? Will people on the planes be wearing face masks? Will there be hand sanitizers? What is the health and cleanliness situation at the other end? Are they independently monitored? All that sort of stuff. So safety is going to be a big issue for, I would say, at least a year, if not more.
And what about those hotels where we've really crammed ourselves in and we have, jockeyed for position with the Germans around the swimming pool? Are we going to want to do that? I mean, that sounds dangerous to me, the idea that lots of people packed in. I think if I'm going overseas, I want to go somewhere where there's a bit more space.
Well, I think that's certainly a trend we're seeing at the moment, and particularly in this country. People are avoiding cities because they're so crowded. I mean, they will come back. People will still travel to fabulous European cities, but perhaps we'll see a continuation of this desire for the outdoors, activities, and a bit more space. Of course, that raises the issue, will they then become crowded places? But I think the other big thing is the outdoors is perceived to be, and I think it actually is, safer than the indoors. So it's not so much crowding around a swimming pool, perhaps, as crowding around a buffet. And I think that, again, hotels and accommodation establishments are going to have to demonstrate that they have taken suitable precautions to minimize the risk in all those situations where there are crowds. And I think we'll see that hangover for a while. We'll probably see destinations, especially where they have less access to the vaccine, insisting on things like social distancing and wearing face masks for some time to come, for many months to come, I think.
So do you think places that we have gravitated towards, like the Costa del Sol, where, the people are packed in, are they going to be less busy, or are they going to be as busy as ever this summer? And how? I mean, it's okay for hotels to say, well, okay, we'll make sure there's not too many people crammed around the buffet. But just generally, if the streets are crowded, I mean, that could be a potential disaster.
Yeah, it's a big unknown. But again, I come back to the streets are crowded. The outdoors isn't as dangerous as the indoors.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see pent-up demand, desire for sunshine means that there will be a rush back to these places. And I think people will probably travel in hope and faith rather than fear, so that they hope it'll be okay. They have faith that the people at the other end will look after them and make sure it's hygienic. There might be some reduced travel, and particularly in the more vulnerable groups, the older groups, which are the big travel markets, the empty nesters and people, and a lot of whom have been vaccinated. But the vaccination will be the thing that lets most people off the lead, I think, and give people confidence to travel.
Yeah, I wonder whether the cruise market's going to bounce back, because, I mean, that was obviously that was a particular danger area early on. But I guess if everyone's been vaccinated, or maybe we do get sort of vaccine passports, to show that you have been vaccinated, maybe they could become some of the safest places to be.
Well, the cruise industry is an interesting one, because the cruise lines are saying they are the safest places to be because of their precautions. However, you've seen even those cruises that have started up since the pandemic started. Once somebody gets it on a cruise ship, it tends to run right through the ship. So I think that's a big issue for the cruise lines. But you mentioned vaccine passports. I think we've got to be very careful about the difference between a vaccine passport and a vaccine certificate, because a passport would have a lot of detail, a lot of medical detail probably, that you don't want to be sharing with other people. So I think we've got to be thinking more in terms of things like a certificate that is evidence of vaccination, like the yellow fever certificate that many countries insist on, rather than a passport, which could be, and there's a lot of concern, it's quite controversial, could that be used against you? Would it be used to discriminate against people in getting jobs and getting into theatres, cinemas, pubs, that sort of thing? So for international travel, I would rather talk about a certificate and evidence of vaccination than a vaccine passport.
Now, if you are marketing a destination and you are concerned about, how many people are going to come and whether you can actually cope with the numbers safely, the logical thing to say is, well, okay, let's go after a richer crowd. Let's have fewer people coming to our country, but let's make sure they're going to spend more. Let's get the high spenders. Do you think a bit of that might be going on?
Well, it may be, and I think maybe, but the other thing is that in chasing the higher spenders, they're only going to spend in certain places. And it does mean, especially, if you're staying in a hotel, they might eat in the fancy hotel all the time. You still want to get people out to restaurants and to do activities and go out and guided tours and things that are probably more local and more sustainable in many ways. So it is, to me, it takes everyone. It has to be kaleidoscopic. You have to have the higher spenders and the lower spenders who will travel and spread around more and provide more revenue for the villages and the remoter areas that maybe the higher spenders wouldn't go to. So it has to be that balance, I think.
So you wrote in a blog on yellowroad.com, your business's website, the market segments, the most resilient market segments that you think are going to kickstart this resurgence of travel. So take us through. I love these acronyms: the slow-mos, the FOMOs, and the YOLOs, and the bliss days. I'm not quite sure about that one, but to certainly take me through the first three. So the slow-mos, first of all.
The slow-mos, don't we all love to hate these acronyms? The slow-mos are the people. This is about slow motion travel. And to me, it's about, instead of just Instagram snacking and then moving on and then forgetting where you've been and only remembering it through your camera lens, it's about slow motion, stopping to smell the roses, stopping to eat and savor and taste and smell the place and get under the skin of the place. And it's kind of like, we want to go home having eaten in that restaurant only the locals know about. Well, I don't actually think there are many of those left, but or having been to that beach that there was nobody on, and again, very few.
And that means staying in one place longer, doesn't it? Really,
it does. And it also, I think, is a more sustainable form of travel and more responsible, because it tends to mean that you spread around a country a bit more. And instead of just spending money in the big tourist attractions, you're actually getting out and into the place and leaving more money behind in the communities.
Yeah. Which is actually, I mean, I remember years ago, that's how we, it's certainly in Australia, that's how we used to promote Britain. Come here and, stay in a few places, but spend a week in each, rather than careering around the country, spending a night in a different hotel each time, because you could go to the local pub, get to know a few local people, and you're not packing and unpacking. So it's that sort of thing you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, So just on that, I think it's also, the pandemic has made people realize what matters. And that is more about relationships and getting something out of going somewhere, rather than just, as I say, Instagram snacking.
And everyone in the world has got something in common now, because we've all been through this. So, I mean, you've got a conversation starter, whoever you talk to, wherever you are, haven't you, really? What about the FOMOs then? Fear of missing out, acronym number 2.
These are, the fear of missing out. These are the people who just want to go to the coolest, latest places. They don't want to feel they haven't been to the coolest places. They're the zeitgeist disciples, and they want to come back and be up there with all the cool kids and be able to say, yeah, I've seen it, I've been there, I've done that. So,
and this will be a younger crowd, presumably. Yeah,
largely, yes.
So they will feel less at risk. So will be prepared to take more risks, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think so. And they're going to have less concern, less health concerns, and because they're younger, they're not as vulnerable as older people. So much more prone, I think, to travel sooner rather than later.
Right, which is a bit similar to the third one. We won't do all 4, but the YOLOs, you only live once.
They're the greyhounds of travel. They're young enough to know that risk doesn't apply to them. They just want to get out there and do it. But you just said you're not going to deal with the blisters. I mean, I must admit I made that acronym up myself. But it is the bucket list ticker offers, who are the older generation who realise there's lots of places to see and not so much time left to see them. So they're the YOLOs of the older generation. They just want to get out there and do it.
Right.
The only live onceers, their risk profile is different too. They're just going to say, let's do it.
Right. Well, they are the people, obviously, that tourism operators want to see. So if you are one of those, then go to Tom's blog and find out which are the most resilient travelers, the most resilient sectors that you perhaps should be aiming for. Just quickly before you go, I mean, a lot of talk right now about climate change, of course. Do you think that we are becoming more concerned about that, and that is going to impact on our travel choices? Will we, for example, take less long-haul flights because we're worried about the impact that those flights are having on the ecology of the planet?
Well, there's an element of the Greta Thunberg principle there, I think, but I don't think it is huge. And you have to look at the other side of that. If you don't travel to a lot of these places that are dependent on tourism, a lot of people who have no other economic opportunity will lose jobs. So there's two sides to it. And you need to put aviation on a balance sheet with fashion, with the internet, which takes up far more carbon than aviation, as I understand it.
There we are. Listen down there. You rest the case for the defence, my lord. Good to talk. We'll catch you again soon. It's been great fun. Good to talk to you.
Okay, cheers, Will.
And that's It's the Business for today. Look, tomorrow, a bit of personal finance. If you've managed to save a bit of money during the COVID crisis, if you found it hard to spend because you can't go out and you've got some money sitting in your bank account, what do you do with it? Personal finance expert Jasmine Birtles will be joining me tomorrow morning on the programme. Thanks for listening today. Catch you in the morning.
It's the Business with Phil Dobbie. Listen online at itsthe.business or wherever good podcasts are found.